Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is Brianna and this is For Pause in a Book. I make book and lifestyle related content, so if that's something that you're interested in, make sure that you hit that subscribe button down below. Today I'm going to talk to you about the books that I have read so far in the month of August. So if you have watched my book haul or any of my vlogs this month, you know that I have a very big project that I'm working on. I'm trying to read 33 books in 31 days, and I'm actually doing a pretty good job of it. This stack here is bigger than, honestly, most months' wrap-ups. I have 16 books to talk to you about. I've finished 15 books. I've DNF'd one. I think that's how the math works. When I do my end of month wrap up, I will talk about my statistics and all that stuff. But for the purpose of today, I'm just going to talk to you about the books that I've read, how I liked them, what I thought about them, ratings, things like that. That way, at the end of the month, I can refer you back to this video, and that wrap up won't be like 2 hours long. I do have to film this pretty quickly, so we are going to try to roll this quickly. However, go grab a drink because it's probably going to take a while. The first two books I'm going to talk about together because they are a series or a duology. First two books in the series, I don't really know. But that's A Spindle, Splintered and A Mirror, Mended. Yeah, I know, I still have the BOGO sticker on it. It won't come off, weirdly enough. A Spindle, Splintered and A Mirror, Mended by Alex E. Harrow is a modern day reimagining of fairy tales. This is a Snow White retelling in like a modern day universe where a girl has a like chronic illness. She's supposed to die by the time she's 22. So then because of that, she ends up like obsessed with Snow White her entire life. And then A Mirror, Mended kind of continues that story with Maleficent. This was a reread for me. I read it last year as an ARC, but then I wanted to reread it as an audiobook, and then I also picked up this one. This one I gave it 4 stars. Upon reread, it was the same rating, but this one I ended up only giving 3 stars. I didn't like it quite as much. I think the pacing was a little bit off. For like half of it, it felt like a filler episode, like why were we here, what were we talking about, what's the point? And then the second half of it, we tried to like rewrite the magic system and redo all the rules, which is fine, you can do that in a fantasy series, but like not in 50 pages. So it was like nothing, everything. And the pacing was just too off. So didn't love that. But I'll still continue the series if it continues on. I've heard somewhere that this was only a duology, and so this is how it ended. I definitely think she left enough doors open that she could continue the series. So I would continue it, but it was not my favorite. Next up, I read If It Makes You Happy by Claire Kahn. This was one of the books for my Magical Readathon TBR, and this is a YA contemporary with a plus-size main character, which I absolutely loved the plus-size representation in here. There's a scene at the doctor's office where she just kind of tells the doctor off. She's like, you're going to tell me that I need to lose weight, but I'm really just here for my vaccine. That's it. So please stop telling me to lose weight. She wouldn't get on the scale because it wasn't necessary for getting her vaccine. And like, I wish I had that audacity as a high school graduate. That would have been fantastic. I also gave this one 3 stars. I understand this is YA, and so definitely I'm not the target audience for it. However, I do think that some of the relationships were really messy on almost a toxic level. It wasn't just the, like, you know, messy YA relationships. Winnie has a best friend. She's called her ungirlfriend. I can't remember the friend's name, but they're kind of had this like queer platonic relationship going on, and then Winnie meets a boy and she kind of wants to start dating him, but it's kind of like a package deal where the best friend also comes along with it, so it's kind of this like introduction into polyamory, but very messy. And I think that the friend had this really codependent relationship and like wasn't okay with Winnie dating, but then didn't actually want to be in a relationship with Winnie. It was a whole thing, and it was just messy, and it was just never talked about. And if we would have just had like a conversation of being like, hey, you're not being cool, then it would have been addressed and it would have been fine. But like as it stood, it's just a little bit toxic. So 3 stars. It definitely has so much diversity and representation in it, so I love it for that. But I am finding that like YA contemporaries are just not my thing anymore. I've unhauled the majority of them. So this just kind of fell into that camp as well. Next up, I read A Magic Steeped in Poison by Judy Eileen, and I gave this 4 stars. This is a YA Asian-inspired fantasy. This definitely reads on the YA side. Very much a YA fantasy book. This has a very unique magic system that I really enjoyed. It is tea-based magic. Essentially, this girl is studying to be a tea magician. I can't remember what they're actually called. She actually poisons her mother and kills her accidentally. And then also her sister drinks that and is like severely ill. So she ends up going to the capital where they're having this competition for like making tea, and she tries to win this competition so that the princess will help her. That way her doctors can see her sister, the winner of the competition, essentially like gets something from the princess. There was also this like shadow boy love interest that was really kind of cute and adorable. My problem with this book is I felt like the stakes were too low. I think that like there was a lot going on that were like life and death stakes. However, it didn't feel like that. And I don't know, I just couldn't quite get into it. And I think that's probably because I've been reading a lot of adult fantasy, and so maybe if you read a lot of YA fantasy, you won't feel that way. But obviously, like, the stakes in an adult fantasy are so much higher, so that's why I didn't necessarily love this one. But again, I love the representation and the diversity in this, and the world building was just phenomenal. So I appreciated that, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. I will read the second book in the duology. I think it actually comes out next week or the week after, something like that. Next up, I read Queen Takes Rose by Katie Robert. This is the 6th and final book in the Wicked Villain series. This series takes popular Disney characters, specifically the villains, and it gives them romances. And I love this series. I know that there's a ton of people that don't, but I love this one. I think it's phenomenal. I have a lot of fun with it. It's very steamy, very spicy, and essentially this one is Aurora and Malone, or Maleficent. And they have this wonderful sapphic romance. Aurora and Malone are both very well-defined characters from previous books, specifically Aurora because she works for Hades, and so she's been in every book since the beginning. So it was really nice to see her having her own book. Nearing the end of her contract, Aurora goes to Malone and spends a couple of weeks there, and it was so spicy. I mean, chapter 2, we were doing it. It was phenomenal. There's not a ton of plot in this book or any of the books. However, this definitely sets up the next series that Katie Robert has written. Sabine Valley, I think is what it is. But this one was good. I will eventually read that one. I think they're on Kindle Unlimited. They might be on Hoopla as well. But this was a great ending to this series. Made me a little bit more gay. If you watched my vlog, I talked about just basically reading the smallest books on my TBR. So you're going to see some really like random books here. I just basically took the order from Goodreads on page count and just read a whole bunch of books. I read like 9 books in 1 week. So we have Aminas Voice by Hannah Khan. This is a middle grade contemporary about a middle schooler, Pakistani American. Her best friend is South Korean, like a South Korean immigrant. And she's actually going through the citizenship test. Her friend wants to change her name and have like a more American name after she gets that, or she passes that test. And so she just feels like everything is changing around her. And it's like, obviously, I don't read a lot of middle grade. So like for me, it was middle of the road. But I think if you read a lot of middle grade, or you really can appreciate and enjoy middle grade, this might be a really good book for you. The diversity is phenomenal. And I think that like for their age, they have very real anxieties, very real fears. The characters were written really well in a way that they were very believable as middle schoolers. For me, I gave it 3.5 stars. I think it was really well done. I'm not the target audience for it, though. Then I read Anyas Ghost by Vera Broskal. Can't speak. It's entirely too early in the morning, and this is the second time I'm filming this. It's fine, don't worry about it. This is a YA graphic novel. I say it's YA, questionably, because, like, it definitely, like, looks middle grade, right? The art style looks kind of middle grade. However, the characters deal with some really, like, mature things. They're going to parties. She smokes. She's dealing with a lot of, like, body image issues. I'm not saying that you can't have body image issues in middle school, but, like, they came across more as high schoolers. So, I ended up giving this one 2 stars. 1, because of those body image issues. At the beginning of the book, her mom is making her, like, this traditional Russian dish. She's like, I can't eat that. It's too greasy. There's too much oil in it. I'm just going to eat this low-fat yogurt. And, like, she has all these conversations, and, like, she looks in a mirror and she sees herself as much bigger than she actually is. But then that's never addressed. And we never say anything about it. We never address it. We never talk about it. There's never an adult that talks about it. And so, as someone who might be reading this, and you're like, well, I'm bigger than she is, so I must not be able to eat anything, right? If she only can eat non-fat yogurt, I can't eat anything. And we can't do that. We can't do that anymore. There's a lot of toxicity amongst the girls. There's a lot of, like, girl on girl hate, and we don't need that. I guess I should talk about the synopsis of this book. Essentially, this girl falls into a hole, is rescued from the hole, but, like, when she's down there, she meets this ghost, and the ghost is able to, like, travel back with her, and then, like, follows her around, goes to school with her, things like that. It's kind of spoilery who the ghost ends up being, but it just... I gave this 2 stars. It wasn't for me. It's getting unhauled. However, I did read a graphic novel that I loved, and that was Lore Olympus, Volume 1 by Rachel Smythe. This is a Hades and Persephone retelling, kind of all of the Greek gods, really. They're all involved, but it's mostly focusing on Hades and Persephone, and the art style is just so pretty. Like, it's just so pretty. I really, really enjoyed this. This is a popular Webtoons comic that's being released in, like, print form, obviously. As someone who has, like, recently really started liking Greek mythology retellings, thank you, Katie Robert and Neon Gods, I really liked this. It was a very quick read. It was very fun, though, and, like, we love a cinnamon roll Hades. We do. We love him. I gave this one 4.5 stars. Okay, then I read Luster by Raven Lalani. This one is actually, it's a funny story, because after I read this one, then Kayla from Books and Lala put out her video about reading this one. For some reason, I think it was for the TikTok one, maybe. It was a happy coincidence. It was just kind of interesting that she did that. And I did. This one's just the next on the Goodreads list. This is about a black woman who gets fired from her dead-end admin job. Very boring. But she ends up getting fired from that. She meets this man who is married. And they start this, like, open relationship. He has an open marriage. And so they start this relationship. And then through a series of events, she ends up moving in with the couple, with their family. So the married couple and their daughter, who is adopted, she's black, basically, like, she tries to, like, teach the daughter how to do her hair naturally and things like that, because she's never had, they live in a very white suburban neighborhood. So anyway, this is definitely a character study. It's definitely, like, on the literary fiction side of things. So if you like those things, I think this book would be really interesting for you. It's like a slice of life story. You're not really sure, like, what you're supposed to gain from it. So I really enjoyed this book, but in a way of, like, how do you say that you're enjoying a book where, like, all you're doing is reading someone suffering? This is a great description of how one thing can spiral and dominoes just fall and everything spirals out of control just because of, like, one thing went wrong. I am not the channel for literary fiction recommendations. I didn't see the appeal in this so much in the fact that, like, I don't know, I just need something more to grip me into the story. But it was a good read. I can see the appeal in it. However, then I tried to do another literary fiction, and that was Vladimir by Julia May Jones. This cover, ugh. I gave this 2 stars. This is from the perspective of this, like, unnamed English professor, I think, in a small school. I don't remember. And her husband, who has been accused of having an affair with students, and so he's being accused of that. He's, like, on this, like, school trial thing, I don't know. And then she is also, like, having this affair, or likes this poet or author that was doing a guest circuit lecture at the college. This book was just white people problems, and I didn't care at all. Like, not for one page did I care what was going on with any of these characters. I don't know. I think Vladimir is the author, the poet, But beyond that, I don't even know what anyone's name is. And this was comped as, like, My Dark Vanessa, because it's a very similar story in the fact that, like, the teacher is being accused of having affairs with students, except that it's actually a college and not a high school. And so I got really excited because My Dark Vanessa was one of my favorite books of 2020. This was not anywhere close to that. Not anywhere close to that. I wanted to see more of the, like, the actual trial, the, like, that type of thing. This was just so boring, and I didn't care. I did not care. The next book I read was One to Watch by Kate Stayman London. I was very hesitant to go into this book because there were definitely some criticisms out there, and I was afraid that this wasn't going to have very good representation, but I had a lot of fun with this, and I think that the representation, while not the best, spoiler alert, probably the best plus-size representation in romance that I've ever seen. Like, that series. So this one, like, wasn't at that par, at that level, but I don't think it was a bad representation of plus-size representation. I think that there was a lot of criticism about how, like, she wasn't confident in herself, and she was, like, portrayed as this person who, like, was body positive, but then she doubted herself. And you know what? I think that's realistic. I think that there are times where, like, it doesn't matter what you say to the public, where you're, like, trying to even convince yourself, like, I am body positive, I don't care what I look like, you know, I look hot, da-da-da-da-da. But then, like, there is that little point in your head where you're like, but actually, what if people don't like me? What if they are just saying this to get ahead for themselves and they're just using me, right? I think we all go through that. And so I think being in her head was really interesting. This is one of those ones where a single POV romance was not bad. Essentially, the synopsis of this book, again, being very bad at doing that today. She is watching their version of The Bachelor, this world's version of The Bachelor, and she sends out this tweet, like she's live tweeting it, and she's like, why is there no body positivity? Why are they all like hot dudes and very tiny women, right? And so then that tweet ends up going viral, and she becomes the next Bachelorette. Obviously, when you have like national attention, you're going to doubt yourself. There's trolls on the internet, right? Like, and sometimes you believe them. So I don't think that that representation was too terrible. I do think that everyone in this book needs therapy. I do think that the ending was not great, unfortunately. These characters just need a good therapist before they try to be in a relationship. So I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars, and I did have a lot of fun reading this one. So my only 5-star read, so by default, my favorite book that I've read so far this month is The Measure by Nikki Erlich. This one was such an out of left field book. I think I remember seeing it on NetGalley and was like, oh, this looks interesting. And then it was Barnes & Noble's like book club pick. And so it was 50% off, or buy one, get one 50% off, whatever. And I was actually like at the table, and an employee walks up to me and she goes, this book was amazing. I read it in one night. You have to pick it up. She knows I read a lot. She knows I'm in there all the time, right? So I was like, okay. I did. And then I didn't read it, okay? For like a month and a half. Like, this book has been on my shelf for a month and a half. Not even on my shelf. It's been in my car, actually. And I went into Barnes & Noble more than once. And she goes, what did you think of The Measure? How did you like The Measure? Wasn't it amazing? And I kept having to tell her, I haven't read it yet. Because my toxic trait is buying books and then not reading them for 6 months. So I vowed that before I went back into Barnes & Noble, which I'm going to be doing this weekend, while, you know, it's my birthday, I'm going to be going back in there, I would read it. And she was right. This book was so good. This book is kind of a near-future dystopian science fiction-ish book. I don't really know where to put it, because it's definitely more of just like a social commentary, right? Essentially, everyone in the world gets a box delivered to them, anyone who's an adult, so 22 or older. They get a box, and inside the box is a little string, and that measures your life, right? And obviously it doesn't like tell you exactly when you're gonna die, but mathematicians started figuring it out. And so there became this whole commentary about what, you know, if you are a short stringer, do you have the same access to things? Like, can you be in the military? Can you run for public office? Do you have better insurance if you're a long stringer? That kind of thing. there was a lot of commentary about like whether or not you should even open your box. Like, right? Should we just like leave it up to fate? There were short string support groups. That's hard to say. There were short string support group for people that like were only going to live 5 more years, or their spouses were only going to live 5 more years. This was like really, really good. You know, I'm a sucker for a book that has a sociological experiment in it, and really deals with how society handles certain things. And so I think that's probably why I was sucked into this book immediately. And it was so good. It was political. It was like religious. It was psychological. It was queer. There's 2 main characters in here that are girlfriends, and one of them ends up with the short string, one ends up with the long string. And so there's this conversation of like, well, should we get married? Should you leave me so that you can go on and live a nice long life with another long stringer? Like, it's also like very personal and romantic. And yeah, really love this book. Like, out of left field, but I love this book. Then I read The Roughest Draft by Emily Wibberley and Austin Sigmund Roca. I read this because it's compared to Book Lovers. It kind of has the same premise where 2 authors are trying to like write a book, whereas Book Lovers is like an editor trying to edit a book, or 2 editors trying to edit a book. And I liked this one better than Book Lovers, but I think as a romance, it didn't quite hit. I really liked the background behind the scenes aspects of it, because there's like, they are trying to write this book, and you really see that kind of like, if it was a movie, you would have seen, it would have been like an action montage, right? You see how they're writing this book while they're on this retreat in Florida. And I really liked that. I'm a very creative person, and I like to see those like behind the scenes of how a piece of art is made, whether that be a video, book, whatever. And so that part I really liked. However, one of the main characters, the woman is engaged to like their publicist, and then he's divorced. And so like, you know, going into it that there's not as much tension there. You know that there was something that happened to them 4 years ago, and they weren't even speaking prior to starting to write this book again. And so they really like, they didn't even do anything until like 75% of the way in. So it's like the slowest of burns, right? Gave this one 3.5 stars. I had a good time reading it. The audiobook is actually really good, but I don't think it's not 5-star material. It's not best romance ever kind of thing. Then we have my DNF, and that was The Butterfly Garden by Dot Hutchinson. I'm not going to talk about this one for very long. This book just wasn't working for me. The writing style was a little bit confusing. It would like swap from first person to third person, and it was just confusing me, and because of that, I wasn't really invested in this story. It did feel kind of like a Criminal Minds episode, but I wasn't invested in it, and I think a lot of that was because you were trying to figure out like whose head you were in. Just because of the POV switching, I didn't really love that. There's also not chapters in here. There's just like page breaks when the POV switches, and some of the POV switches were only like this big. And so it was just, the character hopping was a little too much for me. So totally see why people love this book. It's just, it wasn't the book for me. And I didn't want to like give it a low rating, so I just DNF'd it. Okay, and then I picked up Lore Olympus Volume 2. When I finished Volume 1, I immediately went on to Pango and purchased Volume 2, and it came very quickly, and I think I read it the day after it got here. And again, like, so pretty. Hades is a dog dad, and we stan. We love him, okay? So again, just a continuation of the Webtoons comic. It's adorable. Can't wait for Volume 3. Then the last book that I read was The Romance Recipe by Ruby Barrett. This I actually finished up just last night. And I really enjoyed this book. The smuttiness, the steam, the spice, like, God tier. This was so sexy. So good. This is about a restaurant owner and a chef. And there is a little bit of a cooking competition in it. But it's definitely more in the background. It's not so much like forefront. Essentially, they are trying to save their restaurant. They are, you know, a week away from closing because they're going to have to, like, they don't have the money to do payroll and to pay their vendors and to pay their rent and all that stuff. And so it's just like a continuous vicious cycle. And so then they end up going on to this show to, like, try to promote their restaurant. So it's kind of in the background. I really appreciated Sophie's character. She came out as bisexual at 30 years old while engaged to a man. And she had a very similar coming out experience to an ex-partner. So I really appreciated and empathized with that, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why I loved this book so much. My biggest qualm with it, and the reason why it's not 5 stars, is how short it is, right? It's under 300 pages, and one of the things that I think suffers is the character backstory and just like really fleshing out these two girls. We start to see a couple of things with their families, their respective families, but like I wanted to see more. I wanted to see a family dinner. I wanted to see, you know, just like just more. And I think with an extra 50 pages, this would have been on par with some of my favorite romances, but I needed a little bit more. I think this is a debut. It's also indie published, so I will read more from this author. This, like, the smut was so good, and this cover is so pretty. I enjoyed this. I can see why people might not like this one. I'm not gonna say that this is a romance for everybody, but I do think that it's probably one of my favorite restaurant romances, which is high praise for me as someone who has, you know, read a lot, but also like works in restaurants and has worked in restaurants my entire adult life. Those are the books that I have read so far in the month of August. It's a lot. I am in the middle of Babel by R.F. Kuang. I had this as an ARC. It comes out next Tuesday. I don't know that I'm going to finish it by Tuesday. We'll see. I'm taking it very slow. It's a very dense book, and there's a lot of vibes. And I'm really enjoying it, but I don't know when I'm going to finish it. So I'm not making any promises, but hopefully we see that at the end of the month. That is all I have for you today. If you're new here and you have not yet subscribed, there's a little red button that you can do so down below the video, and all of the other links to my social media will be in the description below if you would like to be my friend on any other platform. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.